Hey folks, welcome to Rule of Law. Today I want to start a series talking about games you can play other than Dungeons and Dragons. And the reason for that is twofold. One, the ongoing OGL debacle, and I do have more to say about that, but I want to talk about some fun things too. And second, playing a variety of games will make you a better player and a better GM at whatever game you happen to be playing on any particular day. And one of the games I think has done the most for improving how I think about games is this one right here, Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark takes a very different approach from most fantasy games. Most fantasy games are kind of like a multi-tool. They've got all sorts of little bits that let you accomplish a whole bunch of different things pretty well. So you can do dungeon crawling, you can do some political intrigue, although they might not be the best at that. You can do overland exploring, and they'll be okay. And one place that they typically struggle is running a heist. You know, the big Ocean's 11 or Snatch kind of heist where you've planned out this brilliant criminal enterprise and you're going to execute it. Blades in the Dark fills in that gap. It is much more like a stiletto than a multi-tool because it aims to do one thing and one thing really well. And so this is designed for running heists and sort of playing a group of criminals in a fantasy setting. Now, as I mentioned, heist play tends to be something where typical fantasy role-playing games struggle. And the reason for that is there's a couple of problems that come up. The first is the incredible amount of planning you spend on it. You're going to sit down with your friends and then just try to account for every possible eventuality, which is going to potentially result in some arguments or disagreements. And you have to shop for gear so that you've got stuff for everything. And I don't know about you, but when I watch Ocean's 11, the let's go shopping and try to account for every problem doesn't seem like the fun part that I want to replicate. So that kind of bogs the game down. The second thing is that when you're running a heist in, for instance, Dungeons and Dragons, it tends to be that you start out doing Ocean's 11 things, and then as soon as something goes wrong, something happens that you didn't plan for, or you fail an important check, suddenly you've gone from, a heist movie to a comedy movie. And it's just combat and silliness, and that's fun too, but not really what you came for, right? So it might be great, but you're sitting down, you're getting a different experience than what you wanted. And if you really want that good heist experience, maybe that's not what you're getting. Blades in the Dark solves this through a number of really clever ways. And the first thing that they do is they actually fast forward through all of the planning. There's sort of a single dice roll to basically say, we're assuming we're planning this heist out. How did we do? And a lot of the planning is kind of done retroactively. And an example of this is that in Dungeons and Dragons, you're sitting there and you plan out what exactly do you have. I have a set of lockpicks and a backup set of lockpicks. I have 3 flasks of acid. I have, a sleeping potion that I'm going to use on, this. I have everything detailed. Blades in the Dark, you don't do that. Instead, you choose whether your character is going in with light gear, medium gear, or heavy gear. And that decision will determine how your character looks. If you've got light gear, then you can pass as somebody who's just, in street clothes. I'm not doing anything wrong, sir. Whereas if you are in heavy gear, you are obviously up to no good to anybody who sees you. This is the equivalent of walking into the party wearing body armor and a full tactical vest, and people go, this guy's up to something. Like right now, stuff is going to go down. But the actual decision of what these things are. So if you have light gear, that lets you carry, I think it's 3 different things, but you don't decide what those things are until you need them. If I encounter a lock and I want to get through that lock, I might say, turns out I've had a flask of acid this whole time and I get to use it. Putting that decision to the moment where the action is happening lets you focus on the action instead of on the planning. And I really like that. It's something that I haven't seen in a lot of other games, and it really improves the Blades in the Dark experience. There's other aspects of Blades in the Dark that turn the traditional role-playing game kind of style of doing things on their head. One example I'll give of this is the skill mechanics. So in Dungeons and Dragons and many other games, you describe what you want to do, and then the game master tells you how you roll for it. So you might say, listen, I want to move this heavy boulder out of the way, so that we can get into this cave. And in Dungeons and Dragons, the GM will probably say, okay, roll athletics. The difficulty for that is 14. And so then you roll what the DM told you. Whereas in Blades in the Dark, you have to actually figure it out. You've got a number of different skills, and each of these skills are sort of broad and overlapping. So you might say, listen, I want to use wreck on this boulder, and I want to smash the boulder, or I want to use wreck to physically push the boulder out of the way. That's one way of doing it. But you might, for instance, want to use finesse and say, listen, I'm going to see if I can get this boulder to roll somehow. Like maybe I can move some smaller stuff out of the way, and by being clever, I can move this boulder. That's not typically an option in most other games, and that provides for a lot more flexibility. Blades in the Dark also puts a lot more responsibility on players in other ways. If I am running the game as a game master, I can offer somebody what's called a devil's bargain. And so that's something where you're rolling the dice and I say, here's the thing, you can get a bonus to this check, but you also have to accept some sort of consequence for it. And that allows you to, to really start throwing those twists in that are akin to, those heist movies you love watching. But players can do that too. So as a GM, I might say, okay, you're doing this thing, and a player says, I've got a devil's bargain. How about, you succeed, or you're more likely to succeed at, scaring off these villains, but they'll come back later. They'll be back later on. And the player might say, you know what? That's a problem for later down the person who's actually doing the check might say, them coming back later on is a problem for future me. Let's do it. And so now that player, that other player at the game, has shaped what's going to happen in the course of this heist. I, as a GM, have given up a little bit of power there, but it's a lot more fun. We're all enjoying this. So I really like that mechanic and how that shapes the game. There's one other sort of thing that I'll note here is the option for a flashback. And so a flashback allows you to say, listen, I would have planned for this. And you can see this in heist movies all the time, where something looks like it's going to be a really big problem. And then they show you that, oh, wait, it's not such a problem after all, because previously, they planned for this. So as an example, my character walks out from this big successful burglary and straight into the arms of one of the police. And now this is a bad situation because in a D&D game, what do I do here? I probably have to turn this into combat, or I have to use some spell to escape. Whereas, here I might say, oh, and I do a flashback. I'm not actually walking out with all of my criminal gear and all of my, all of my ill-gotten gains. I actually handed those off to, a street urchin who we've got a good relationship with, and he's going to run those back. So I run into the guard and he pats me down and I'm clean. This kind of thing helps avoid the problem that you get in Dungeons & Dragons, where running into the guard on your way out just means now it's a fight scene. And that's a great thing. Another really great innovation or really great thing that they do is the use of what they call clocks. And so a clock is basically any sort of, you use them when there's dynamic action where things might slowly change in one way or another. So I described how, a failed sneaking check in Dungeons & Dragons might suddenly mean now the guards are on you and it's a big fight. In Blades in the Dark, it's probably not that. It's probably that I'm setting things up that the more noise you make in the course of a burglary, I'm going to start a clock for things are, you have been discovered. Or maybe even just the home occupants wake up. And so each time you do something that doesn't go so well, I might add some entries to that clock. It might have 8 sort of segments. You can imagine it like a Trivial Pursuit wheel that you're putting those little sort of pie pieces in. And so I might say, listen, there's 8 segments to this clock of the occupants wake up. And so when somebody really bungles a sneaking check, I'm like, it's not, hey, everybody wakes up right now. It's, I'm adding 2 segments to this clock, and now you're getting closer to people waking up because you're starting to make some noise. This allows for consequences that aren't immediate, just everything turns to garbage failure. And it really tends to improve the experience by increasing tension over time. Things are getting worse. We're getting closer to them waking up, but not having it become that Benny Hill experience that is just not what you came for. You can chain these clocks. It might be the first clock, was 8 segments for the people in the house wake up. And then after that, it might be a 4 clock, a 4 segment clock for now that they've woken up, when do they call the guards? Like, they've been woken up in the night by some noises, but maybe they don't know what it is right now. They're still thinking, is there a rat making noise? What's going on? This allows you to, have escalating tension and is a really great mechanic. I really like it. Blades in the Dark is played pretty much entirely with 6-sided dice, which is also fantastic. I mean, you can get 6-sided dice anywhere. It might be hard if you're, for instance, on a trip to get a set of polyhedral dice. That's sort of something that you'll find at specialty stores. Everywhere has 6-sided dice. And the dice roll mechanics are pretty simple. If you are rolling, for instance, Rec, and you have 4 points in Rec, then you roll 4 6-sided dice. And you look at the highest score. If the highest score is a 6, that's sort of a perfect success. Everything goes off how you planned. If the highest score is a 4 or a 5, it's a success with a wrinkle, with some sort of consequence. And lower scores go down all the way to this just really was ineffectual. What that means is that most of your dice rolls will actually end up being, you succeed, but. And that really helps, again, with the narrative tension and the escalating difficulty. Blades in the Dark also, you don't just have difficulty as to what you're doing. You also have your positioning. And so you can be in a controlled position, a risky position, or a desperate position. And that can mean, that's sort of, what is your narrative like at this point? Am I trying to get into a fight with somebody and I'm hitting them from behind when they don't know that I'm there? That is a controlled position and will mean that I'm more likely to succeed. Whereas, am I outnumbered? Have I just walked into a group of 4 rival gangsters and I'm trying to fight my way through, but there's more of them than there are of me? That might be a desperate position. You can also have different effect levels. So you might have a limited effect or you might have a great effect, and there's various ways to change that as you go. So I think Blades in the Dark is actually a fairly newbie-friendly game, and I'm going to put this to the test because I'm going to be running a game fairly soon. Hopefully I'll be able to share that with you guys, but I've specifically recruited people with basically no tabletop role-playing game experience. And I'm hoping that they're going to do just fine at it. We're going to go through character generation, and I'm planning to try to get us through sort of a quick heist just to see, how do newbies manage at this game? One thing that I will note is that this can be actually a little challenging for people who have a lot of role-playing game experience. There are a lot of different assumptions in Blades in the Dark than your standard game experience. Again, things like the GM tells you, or the GM doesn't feed you what thing you want to roll. You tell the GM what you're doing, and they decide, hey, maybe it doesn't work that well if you're trying to use Rec to convince somebody at a party that you are a decent person. Maybe that's something that you should use Consort for instead. So Rec will have limited effect here. The GM gets to make that call. But you get to decide which checks you're rolling. That's something that really sticks or is a kind of point of difficulty for a lot of people in the traditional experience. And the aspects of players being able to shape the game and to do things like flashbacks and so forth tends to be something that is a bit of a gear change. And again, I think this is all fantastic because when I say that by playing a variety of games, you will get better at role-playing games in general, I have tried with varying degrees of success to borrow elements of this in other games that I play. I've tried to include flashbacks in D&D games, and I will definitely, I use clocks in everything now. So steal elements from this game, but it is worth playing and experiencing and just seeing what a good heist can feel like so that you can try to replicate that in other games. I really like this game. It is one of my favorite games. I can't recommend it enough. So Blades in the Dark, as I said, if you're looking for heist play, this is the one. Now, this is the Forged in the Dark system, and they have other games that are designed for this system. So if you don't like the setting of Blades in the Dark, and I love the setting of Blades in the Dark, let's talk about that for a second. The setting of Blades in the Dark is basically a town that's like London or Venice or Prague, kind of rolled together, but it's in a fantasy setting where the sun doesn't exist anymore. The sun went out, and most of the world is covered by sort of an army of hungry ghosts, because everybody who dies, if they're not sort of treated properly, might come back as a ghost. These ghosts are kept out by a giant lightning fence that they keep powered by going out and hunting sort of Cthulhu-esque monsters out of the deep and using their blood as an energy source. The reason why, I mean, aside from just being cool, is that they want to keep everybody in a pressure cooker. The setting of Blades in the Dark is one where you can't just like, hey, things are getting a little too, too hot for me. I'm going to leave town for a while. There is no leaving town. You got to lay low and maybe keep things quiet for a bit while the heat dies down. Or eventually you might end up having to go and do some jail time for the crimes you've done. So it's got a really fascinating setting. There's electrical power, there's guns, but it's not like a modern setting. But it might not be your cup of tea. You might say, you know what, I don't like this. I had one person reach out to me and say, listen, I really like the idea of playing a game with you, but I don't like the occult elements of this. Well, good news. They've got some other options. One of them is Scum and Villainy, which is the same sort of system, but in kind of a science fiction setting where it's, you're in space and you're doing stuff with technology. I really like this setting, as I mentioned, but, it may not be for everybody. The other sort of elements of this is when you look at, most games have what they call classes, and this one instead has what they call playbooks. And playbooks they basically describe how your character solves problems and the tools that they have. So one example is this one, the Cutter. And a cutter is basically you solve your problems through violence. You are, you're a bruiser. And so that means that you go in and you're the guy who gets into fights. And you will actually get more experience for solving problems through violence than other people might. But there's all sorts of, other options, and they're all kind of themed around that setting. So you might play a leech. Leeches are basically your technical experts. They're saboteurs. So whereas a cutter facing a locked door might be like, locked door, huh? Good thing I've got strong shoulders and I'm just going to be able to batter my way through it. A leech is much more likely to be saying, well, which side are those hinges on? I can knock out that hinge pin and we can take the door off. Or I can use a strong acid to dissolve the lock. Different ways of solving the same problem. So, yeah, I've been talking here for about 20 minutes about this game. I could go on about it for hours. As I said, I'm going to be doing some Blades in the Dark live play content. So stay tuned for that. But If you haven't tried Blades in the Dark, I really think you owe it to yourself to give it a try. I run better games in any other setting because I've played Blades in the Dark. And I'm 100% serious about that, so give it a try. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope you found this to be interesting, and, hopefully you're going to give this one a shot if you can. There is a free player's guide out there, so you can get that for nothing. But if this is one where you really do need to buy the book to at least run the game. So check it out. It's not super expensive. There's sort of the one book there, and yeah. If you've played Blades, let me know in the comments sort of what you think. If you think I missed anything, because there's lots of depth to this one. But just, yeah, leave a comment. It really does help with the sort of YouTube back end. Please like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to see more of this kind of content, as well as more of the OGL discussions, because, yeah, I do want to talk about it. It's kind of a depressing topic, and I want to sort of share some happy things. This, I think, is a happy thing. Look at this really awesome game that we can play. But yeah, anyway, thank you for watching. See you next time.